Chapter 1. The celebration turned sour. The golden hour cast long shadows over Beverly Hills' exclusive restaurant row, where the elite gathered under the warm California sky. Dina Wallace, a 25-year-old rising producer, stood in front of the grand entrance to LeBlanc, a restaurant known for catering to the city's most powerful figures. Tonight was supposed to be a celebration, the night she marked her first major achievement as a producer. For years, she had worked tirelessly to prove that her success had nothing to do with being the daughter of the legendary Jake Wallace, a man whose reputation in martial arts and Hollywood had made him a household name. She wanted her name to stand on its own. Her project, a documentary series titled Breaking Barriers, explored the struggles of female martial artists defying societal expectations. The theme resonated deeply with her, given her own struggles navigating an industry that constantly undermined women's contributions. As she approached the heavy brass door handle of LeBlanc, she checked her phone for the reservation confirmation. LeBlanc welcomes Miss Wallace and guests at 8 p.m. Her father had insisted on letting her arrive first, knowing how much it meant for her to be seen as independent. "You've earned this moment, princess. Own it," he had told her earlier that day. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. The restaurant was a symphony of controlled chaos, glittering chandeliers, polished marble floors, and a soft hum of exclusive conversations happening over extravagant French cuisine. The staff moved in seamless precision, ensuring the restaurant's carefully crafted ambience remained unshaken. Dina approached the maitre d', a tall, impeccably dressed man with a nameplate that read Laurent. His posture suggested that his job was as much about keeping people out as it was about welcoming them in. "Good evening," she said, her voice carrying the confidence she had fought to earn. "I have a reservation for 2 under Wallace." Laurent barely glanced up. "Wallace," he repeated, his tone dripping with disbelief. Dina knew that tone. She had heard it before, the unspoken assumption that she didn't belong. "Yes, that's correct," she replied firmly. Laurent's lips pursed as he made a show of checking his tablet, his fingers moving with exaggerated slowness. She could feel the stares from the surrounding patrons, their hushed whispers brushing against her skin like cold air. "Are you quite sure you have the right establishment?" Laurent finally asked, lifting his gaze with an expression that bordered on amusement. "LeBlanc is an exclusive venue." Dina's stomach twisted, but she refused to let it show. "I made the reservation myself last week," she stated, pulling up the email confirmation on her phone. Laurent's gaze flicked to the screen before he exchanged a look with a nearby hostess, Miss Bennett. Their silent communication was loud enough for Dina to hear. "We don't want her here." Dina stood her ground, waiting for the next excuse. Laurent sighed dramatically. There seems to have been an error in our system. Unfortunately, we are fully booked this evening." Dina glanced around. There were at least 5 empty tables. She clenched her fists, channeling the discipline her father had taught her. True power wasn't in reacting, it was in controlling the response. "I don't appreciate what you're insinuating," she said, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. Miss Bennett stepped forward, her tone carefully neutral but laced with dismissal. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of our sister establishments, Miss Wallace. We wouldn't want you to feel out of place." The message was clear. They weren't denying her because of a mistake. They were denying her because they didn't think she belonged. Dina's anger simmered, but she refused to cause a scene. Instead, she did something better. She reached for her phone and made a call. "Dad," she said, keeping her voice calm but firm. "I need you at LeBlanc. Now." The staff exchanged nervous glances, sensing something was about to shift. Chapter 2. The Entrance of a Legend. The next 10 minutes felt like an eternity. Dina remained standing near the podium, her phone still in hand, while the staff whispered among themselves. Some of the wealthier patrons cast amused glances, enjoying the spectacle of someone being humiliated. Then, the atmosphere shifted. The air in the restaurant changed as if the energy of the room itself had taken notice. A new presence had arrived. As the door swung open, the entire restaurant seemed to hold its breath. Jake Wallace stepped inside. His mere presence commanded attention, not because he sought it, but because he didn't have to. Years of martial arts training had honed his every movement to be precise and deliberate. He wasn't dressed in anything flashy, just a tailored black jacket over a dark button-down. But somehow, that made him even more imposing. The security guard, who had been hovering too close to Dina, suddenly found the floor very interesting. Laurent visibly paled. Miss Bennet took a step back. Jake's steel blue eyes locked onto his daughter first. The calm control he was known for was evident in the way he placed a protective hand on her shoulder, his touch both reassuring and unshakable. "Are you okay, princess?" he asked, his voice quiet yet commanding. Dina nodded. "I'm fine, but they're refusing my reservation." Jake turned to Laurent, his expression unreadable. "Would you like to explain why?" Laurent's arrogance cracked like glass under pressure. "And Mr. Wallace, there was an error in." "Stop." The single word carried enough authority to make the room go silent. Jake glanced around, his gaze sweeping over the patrons and staff. When he spoke again, his voice carried beyond just their group. "I've fought many battles in my life," he said. "Some with my fists, some with my words. But the most important fights," he turned back to Laurent, "are about respect." Silence fell over the restaurant. And then, everything changed. Chapter 3. The Turning Point. Silence lingered in LeBlanc. The weight of Jake Wallace's words hung in the air, pressing down on the staff, the patrons, and most importantly, Laurent. Miss Bennet fidgeted uncomfortably, her earlier confidence dissolving. Laurent, still clinging to some semblance of control, cleared his throat. "Mr. Wallace, I assure you, this is simply a misunderstanding." Jake tilted his head slightly, his expression impossibly calm, but his presence was undeniably dominant. "A misunderstanding," he repeated. Interesting choice of words. Dina watched as her father took a slow step closer to the podium. "Because what I see is my daughter, standing here, having made a reservation, being denied service while others are seated without issue." Laurent swallowed hard. He was cornered. One of the wealthier patrons, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, finally spoke up. "Just let them have their table." We all saw what happened. A murmur of agreement rippled through the restaurant. Several customers were watching the scene with newfound interest, some even recording the exchange on their phones. Laurent shifted nervously, realizing he had lost control of the narrative. "Of course, Mr. Wallace. A table is available. Right this way." Jake nodded once, then turned to Dina. "Princess?" Dina, though still fuming inside, took a breath. She had already won. The truth had been laid bare, and they had been forced to back down. She refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her anger. Instead, she squared her shoulders and looked Laurent dead in the eye. "We'll take the best table you have," she said smoothly. "And I expect the service to match." Laurent visibly tensed but nodded. "Of course." Chapter 4. A Statement of Presence. As they were led to a prime spot near the center of the restaurant, every eye remained on them. The tension had not faded completely, but it had shifted. Dina was in control now. Jake took his seat across from her, his lips curving into a proud smirk. "Well handled." Dina exhaled. "I don't want to just handle things like this, Dad. I want to change them." Jake leaned back in his chair, nodding in understanding. "Then use what happened tonight. People recorded it. Word will spread." As if on cue, her phone buzzed with a text from a journalist friend, attached with a short video clip. "Dina, you need to see this. You're already trending." Her eyes widened. She clicked the link. The video was captioned, "Hollywood producer Dina Wallace faces discrimination at elite restaurant. Father Jake Wallace steps in." She scrolled down to see thousands of comments, many of them supportive, some outraged, and others pointing out similar experiences. Jake saw the look on her face and smirked. "Like I said, the most important fights are about respect." Dina set her phone down and picked up her menu, determination burning in her gaze. "Then let's fight." Chapter 5. The Aftermath. By the time Dina and Jake finished their meal, LeBlanc was no longer just a restaurant. It was a battleground where a line had been drawn. The staff avoided their table as much as possible, and whispers still rippled through the air. But Dina didn't care anymore. She had made her statement. As they exited the restaurant, the flashing lights of cameras awaited them. The viral video had already gained traction, and now reporters stood outside, hungry for a soundbite. "Miss Wallace, can you comment on what happened tonight?" one journalist called out. Jake placed a steady hand on her back, letting her decide whether to speak. Dina turned to face the cameras, her voice steady. "I think the video speaks for itself." What happened tonight isn't just about me. It's about a culture that allows discrimination to exist in spaces that claim to be for everyone. And that needs to change. The reporters ate it up, firing off more questions, but Dina and Jake moved through the crowd, heading to their car. As they drove away, Dina's phone buzzed nonstop, messages of support, business opportunities, and even some backlash. "This isn't going away anytime soon," she murmured. Jake smirked. "Good. Now, what's next?" Dina knew the answer before he even finished the question. Chapter 6, Taking Action. Dina wasted no time. The next morning, she arranged a meeting with her PR team, her attorney, and a few close industry allies. They sat around a conference table in her production studio, discussing the fallout. "We need to be strategic," said Rebecca Lynn, her PR manager. "You're getting both praise and backlash. Some people see you as a hero. Others think you're just stirring controversy." Dina nodded. "I don't want to just talk about this. I want to do something." Her attorney, Marcus Hale, leaned forward. "You have legal grounds to sue for discrimination, but we need to decide whether that's the route you want to take." Dina thought about it. A lawsuit would make headlines, but was that enough? Then an idea hit her. "What if we take it a step further?" she said. "What if we start a movement?" Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "Go on." Dina leaned forward. "We create a platform where people can report discrimination at elite venues, hotels, restaurants, private clubs. We expose the patterns, hold these places accountable, and create a real conversation." A slow grin spread across Jake's face. "Now that's a fight worth taking." Rebecca tapped her pen against the table. "It's bold. It's risky. But if done right, it could be huge." Marcus nodded. "It's legally sound, as long as we're careful with the wording. If we frame it as a review-based platform, businesses won't be able to retaliate with defamation claims." Dina smiled. "Then let's do it." The team got to work immediately, brainstorming names, marketing strategies, and outreach plans. By the end of the meeting, they had their mission: expose discrimination, demand change, create accountability. And just like that, the Respect Project was born. Chapter 7, The Movement Begins. The launch of the Respect Project was nothing short of a media explosion. Within hours of the website going live, thousands of users flooded in, sharing their experiences, uploading photos, and naming establishments that had engaged in discriminatory practices. Dina sat in her production studio, scrolling through the flood of reports. "Look at this," she said, spinning her laptop toward Rebecca. "It's not just LeBlanc, it's everywhere." Rebecca's expression darkened as she read some of the testimonies. Luxury hotels, high-end boutiques, elite country clubs. She shook her head. People are getting turned away, mistreated, overcharged, all because they don't fit some acceptable mold. Jake, sitting across the table, folded his arms. And now, they finally have a voice. But not everyone was happy. Chapter 8, The Backlash. Dina's phone buzzed with a call from Marcus. She put him on speaker. "Dina, I just got word. LeBlanc's legal team is threatening to sue." Rebecca raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "Exposing the truth." Marcus sighed. "They're claiming defamation, saying your site is encouraging false accusations. It's a scare tactic, but it could get ugly." Dina leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. "Can they actually win?" "Not if we're careful," Marcus replied. "As long as we ensure the Respect Project only shares verified reports, they don't have a case." Jake smirked. "Then we double down. We don't just let people report discrimination, we fact-check. We build a system that ensures every claim is backed by real evidence." Dina's eyes lit up. A verified registry. A place where people can submit proof emails, receipts, video footage. Rebecca grinned. "And if we do that, no business can claim we're lying." Marcus chuckled. "I like the way you think." Dina's resolve hardened. "Then let's make it happen." The team got to work immediately. The Respect Project wasn't just about stories anymore. It was about holding people accountable. And LeBlanc? They had just picked a fight they couldn't win. Chapter 9, Strength in Numbers. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. As the Respect Project grew, so did its impact. More and more people came forward, sharing their experiences and submitting verified evidence. Rebecca and her team implemented a rigorous verification process, ensuring that every claim was legitimate. The goal was not just exposure, it was justice. Major news outlets began covering the movement. Talk shows, Online publications and advocacy groups started weighing in. Some businesses issued public apologies, promising to change their discriminatory policies. Others, they doubled down, refusing to acknowledge any wrongdoing. And then, the biggest shift happened. A former employee of LeBlanc contacted the Respect Project. Chapter 10, The Whistleblower. The message arrived late at night. I used to work at LeBlanc. I saw firsthand how they profile and reject certain customers. I have proof. Dina read the message twice before replying. Can we talk? The response was almost immediate. Only if I can remain anonymous. If they find out I talked, I'll never work in this industry again. Dina nodded to herself. This was bigger than she expected. The next day, she and Marcus arranged a private meeting with the whistleblower, an ex-hostess named Natalie Park. Sitting across from them at a quiet cafe, Natalie looked nervous, her hands gripping her cup tightly. I knew something was wrong, Natalie said. I worked there for over a year, and they had these unspoken rules about who was acceptable to sit in the main dining area. Dina leaned in. Can you prove it? Natalie nodded, pulling out a USB drive. Everything is here. Emails from management. Internal notes about certain customers. Even security footage shows them turning people away based on nothing but assumptions. Marcus exhaled. This could blow the case wide open. Dina took the drive, feeling the weight of what it meant. Then let's make sure it does. Chapter 11. The Exposure. Within days, the Respect Project published an exclusive report featuring Natalie's revelations. The evidence was undeniable. Screenshots of discriminatory emails, videos of customers being turned away, it was all there. Social media erupted. Hashtag Boycott LeBlanc began trending worldwide. Celebrities, activists, and major influencers weighed in, demanding accountability. LeBlanc's legal team scrambled to respond, but the damage was done. Then came the lawsuit. A coalition of affected individuals, led by Dina and Marcus, filed a class action lawsuit against LeBlanc for discriminatory practices, emotional distress, and fraudulent business operations. Dina sat in her office, staring at the formal documents. This wasn't just about a single dinner anymore. This was about changing the system. Jake walked in, reading over her shoulder. You ready for this? Dina looked up at her father, a fire burning in her eyes. I was born ready. Chapter 12. The legal battle begins. The lawsuit against LeBlanc sent shockwaves through the industry. As soon as the legal documents were filed, the restaurant's PR team scrambled to do damage control. Statements were released, claiming the accusations were baseless, that the Respect Project was just a coordinated attack on fine dining establishments. Dina wasn't fazed. This is exactly what they do, she told Marcus as they prepared for the upcoming court hearings. They spin it. They gaslight. They make it seem like we're the problem. Marcus nodded. That's why we have to be meticulous. No missteps. No loose ends. LeBlanc hired one of the top defense law firms in the country, attempting to dismiss the case before it even reached trial. But Dina and her team had more than enough evidence to hold their ground. The judge rejected LeBlanc's motion to dismiss, setting a date for formal hearings. And just like that, the battle had officially begun. Chapter 13. The Media War. As the trial date approached, the media circus grew. Talk shows debated the case, and public opinion was divided. While many supported the Respect Project, others questioned whether Dina was blowing things out of proportion. One morning, a major news network aired an interview with LeBlanc's CEO, Richard Carlisle. This entire situation is a misrepresentation, Carlisle said smoothly. We've always welcomed a diverse clientele. This lawsuit is a direct attack on our integrity as a luxury establishment. Dina watched the segment from her office, shaking her head. He's good, she admitted. He sounds convincing. Rebecca smirked. Too bad we have actual evidence. As if on cue, a new batch of former employees came forward, confirming the patterns of discrimination at LeBlanc and other high-end venues. Natalie Park, the original whistleblower, agreed to do a televised interview, her face blurred for protection. I saw it happen over and over again, she told the reporter. People being turned away for no reason other than an unspoken bias. Social media exploded once more. Public pressure mounted. Influencers and activists called for sweeping industry changes. Other restaurants started reviewing their own policies, desperate to avoid LeBlanc's fate. Dina knew they were making real progress. Chapter 14, The Courtroom Showdown. The first day of the trial was packed with reporters. Cameras flashed as Dina, Marcus, and their team walked into the courtroom, determination etched onto their faces. The proceedings were intense. LeBlanc's lawyers fought hard, claiming the allegations were exaggerated and that the Respect Project was promoting a cancel culture agenda. Then, it was Dina's turn to speak. She took the stand, looking directly at the jury. This isn't about canceling anyone. This is about basic respect. People should not have to fight for their right to exist in public spaces, to be treated with dignity, regardless of their background. She then played the damning security footage from the restaurant, showing staff deliberately turning away customers based on arbitrary judgments. The courtroom was silent. Even LeBlanc's legal team looked shaken. When the session ended, Jake met Dina outside the courthouse. "No matter what happens next," he said, "you've already won." Dina smiled. "Not yet, but we're getting close." Chapter 15, The Cross-Examination. The second day of the trial was even more intense. The courtroom buzzed with tension as LeBlanc's legal team prepared to cross-examine Dina. Richard Carlisle sat at the defense table, his expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. LeBlanc's lead attorney, Victor Langston, approached the stand. He was a veteran in high-profile cases, known for his aggressive questioning tactics. "Miss Wallace," he began, adjusting his tie. "Your organization, the Respect Project, claims to advocate for fairness. But isn't it true that you're singling out LeBlanc while ignoring similar complaints against other establishments?" Dina met his gaze with unwavering confidence. "We don't ignore anything, Mr. Langston. The Respect Project investigates every credible complaint we receive. It just so happens that LeBlanc has more than most." Langston smirked. "And yet, isn't it true that this lawsuit has given you significant media attention? One might argue that this is less about justice and more about self-promotion." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Dina exhaled slowly, keeping her composure. "This isn't about me. This is about the people who have been mistreated for years. People who were denied service, humiliated, and treated as if they were lesser. I don't need media attention, Mr. Langston. But they do. They need someone to fight for them." Langston hesitated for just a second, long enough for Dina to press forward. LeBlanc had the chance to fix this privately. Instead, they chose to gaslight their customers, deny wrongdoing, and smear those who spoke up. They brought this on themselves. Langston cleared his throat, sensing the jury shifting in Dina's favor. No further questions. Chapter 16, A Desperate Move. After the court adjourned for the day, Dina and her team met in a private conference room to discuss strategy. The case was going well, but Marcus warned them not to get too comfortable. "They're going to try something drastic," he said. "Carlisle isn't the type to go down without a fight." And he was right. That evening, a hit piece surfaced online. An anonymous blog accused the Respect Project of manipulating evidence and paying people to fabricate discrimination claims. The article was filled with vague accusations, but it was enough to make headlines. Dina's phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Reporters were calling. Comment sections were exploding with debates. Rebecca threw her hands in the air. "This is classic smear tactics. We need to hit back, hard." Marcus sighed. "We need to find out who's behind it first. If we retaliate without proof, we'll look guilty." Dina clenched her fists. "Then let's find out. Fast." Chapter 17, Uncovering the Truth. Within hours, the Respect Project's cybersecurity expert, Elliot Cho, traced the smear article to an IP address linked to a PR firm hired by LeBlanc. Elliot grinned, spinning his laptop toward the group. "They didn't even try to hide it that well. Here's the metadata." The article was uploaded from an account tied directly to Carlisle's PR firm. Dina's lips curled into a smirk. "Perfect. Let's expose them." The next morning, the Respect Project released its own article, this time with hard evidence. Screenshots, timestamps, and company records. The internet erupted. #LeBlancLies trended worldwide. News anchors discussed the underhanded tactics, and public sentiment shifted even further in Dina's favor. Even Carlisle looked rattled when he arrived at court the next day. Dina stood tall as she walked past him, whispering just loud enough for him to hear. "Nice try." Carlisle didn't respond. He knew the tide had turned. Chapter 18, The Final Blow. The courtroom was filled with an electric tension as the trial neared its climax. LeBlanc's defense team had been weakened by the exposure of their smear campaign, and now it was time for the Respect Project to deliver the final blow. Dina took her place at the plaintiff's table, her eyes scanning the jury. They had listened carefully throughout the trial, and she knew this was her moment to solidify the case. Marcus stood, adjusting his tie before calling their final witness. "Your Honor," the plaintiffs called Natalie Park to the stand. A murmur rippled through the courtroom as the former LeBlanc employee stepped forward. Natalie had initially wanted to remain anonymous, but after seeing the underhanded tactics the restaurant was willing to use, she had decided it was time to speak out publicly. She was sworn in, her hands trembling slightly as she sat. Dina gave her an encouraging nod. Marcus approached with a reassuring tone. "Mississippi Park, can you tell the jury about your experience working at LeBlanc?" Natalie took a deep breath. "I worked at LeBlanc for over a year. At first, I thought it was just another high-end restaurant, but I quickly realized that management had certain expectations about the kind of customers we should serve." Marcus nodded. "And what do you mean by expectations?" Natalie hesitated only a moment before she continued. "We were given unspoken guidelines. If someone didn't look like they belonged, whether because of their race, background, or even how they dressed, we were told to say we were fully booked or direct them somewhere else. It was policy." Gasps echoed in the courtroom. Marcus turned to the jury. "And you have proof of this, correct?" Natalie nodded and gestured to the screen, where email correspondences from LeBlanc's management appeared. Messages explicitly outlining how to filter clientele and ensure only the right type of guests were served. The defense lawyer, Victor Langston, stood quickly. "Objection. This is..." The judge held up a hand. "Overruled. The jury will consider the evidence." Dina suppressed a smile. They had them. Chapter 19, The Verdict. The jury deliberated for 2 days. The media was in a frenzy, and public opinion was overwhelmingly in Dina's favor. When the jury finally returned, the courtroom held its breath as the foreman stood. "In the matter of Wallace v. LeBlanc, we find the defendant guilty of discriminatory practices." A wave of emotion surged through Dina as gasps and murmurs spread through the room. The judge turned to LeBlanc's legal team. "The court orders LeBlanc to pay restitution to the plaintiffs and implement policy changes under court supervision." Richard Carlyle's face was pale as he processed the public downfall of his once exclusive empire. Marcus turned to Dina with a smirk. "You did it." Dina let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "We did it." Chapter 20, A New Era. Outside the courthouse, supporters and reporters swarmed. Dina stepped up to the podium, her father standing proudly beside her. "This case was never just about me," she said, her voice steady. "It was about everyone who has ever been told they don't belong. Today, we proved that respect isn't a privilege, it's a right." Applause erupted. LeBlanc's reputation was in shambles. Other high-end establishments rushed to change their policies, fearing similar lawsuits. And the Respect Project? It became a nationwide movement, forcing accountability in ways no one had imagined before. Later that evening, as Dina sat in her office, her father handed her a glass of champagne. "You're going to change the world, princess," he said. Dina clinked her glass against his. "We already have."